Currently there's a big surge in spoon making, and I've been bitten by the bug. So unfortunately for me, I don't sort of have a rocking chair and a pipe to sit down with and carve away till I fall asleep. I like these things. They spin wood around at a high speed and they speed up the process as well. So as you can guess, my spoon carving is secondary to my turning practice. So I'll go through a couple of things with you in this video. First of all, here's a little sample that I made earlier. In this particular case, I did what I'll be outlining again today, turning the handle, the profile of the bowl, and then hand carving the inside. But you don't need to just stick to spoons. You can turn your hand to almost any form of kitchen utensil, just a slightly different type of spoon, spatula. They don't take much time, and the other thing I love, using offcuts. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll give you a bit of an outline on how to set up and a couple of little tricks that I picked up along the way. I need to find the center of the two ends of my piece of wood. So a simple trick is 2 fingers and a thumb holding onto a pencil, and then 2 fingers sliding along the side of the wood. Push the pencil into roughly where you think the center is, slide your fingers along, turn the piece of wood around, and you can create, sometimes you can be really lucky and get center spot on right away, but it's much easier to eyeball the center of that square now, or rectangle in this case, and then just simply stab a center into there. I just use a 75mm nail that's always in the back pocket of my turning smock, and I'm now ready to start, or I'm ready to put this onto the lathe and start working. When it comes to setting up the wood on the lathe, I need to use a drive spur mounted into the headstock of my lathe. There are 2 particular types of centers available. There's a traditional one which has the center point and the 4 spurs, which will dig into your piece of wood. But in this particular case, I prefer using these other types of centers where the center point is spring loaded, and all you do is you line up the center point on your piece of wood, and then tighten the tailstock until the wood is pushed into these little teeth, and they will grip the wood and let it spin around. Setting up your piece of wood is pretty straightforward. The only thing you need to consider is that it's basically a rectangle that's going to be spinning around. So what you may choose to do is, on a saw, either a bandsaw or any other saw, you might want to cut the handle part so that it's pretty well square. And even though the chalk marks don't show up really well on this particular drawing, you do get an idea of the placement of the various parts and the size. So I'm just going to turn this down from a rectangle. So simply line up the center point on the drive spur, set up the center point on the tailstock center. Oh, need to find the very center. There it is. Tighten up the tailstock, make sure everything's locked in position, and make sure that the teeth of the driving spur are embedded in the piece of wood. And by the way, you notice that I've allowed a little bit of scrap. That part, those 2 parts will be cut off later. Bring the tool rest into position about 5mm away from the wood. Make sure that it's about 5mm below center point. Lock everything. All the levers are tight. Everything is locked. Just rotate the piece of wood by hand to make sure it's not going to hit the tool rest. And I'm ready to start. So I just need to grab my safety glasses and I'll be ready to get going. Okay, to get started, basically I'm just going to be using some of the Crown Cryogenic tools, and this is one of the tools that's in the 6-piece kit that I've spoken about in previous videos. So I need to get the lathe started. Just press go, increase the speed, and experience tells me roughly what sort of speed I need to be working at, and safety glasses on. And I'm ready to start working. So keep in mind, I've got a piece of wood that I'm going to hit, miss, because it's a rectangle. So I need to be careful at this stage, but a bit of experience helps you to overcome any fear. Besides, your fingers are going to be well behind the tool rest, so they're protected. So With the roughing gouge, quickly just trim this down. I can see the shadow of the markings on the wood, my chalk marks, so I know roughly where to cut, and I can get started. Maybe a bit more speed. So you get an idea of what I'm doing at this point, and I can smell, which you can't, I can smell the beautiful fragrance of blackwood. This is just an offcut that I had from a table rail that I was working on a while ago. I tend to have a lot of those projects on the go. Okay, so you can see I'm starting to trim this area down. This part here, that will be the bowl shape, I'll cut the profile of that in a moment, but first I'll rough this down from about here down to the end and keep working. Okay, as you can see, I've trimmed down the bulk of the handle, and I didn't mention it before, but yeah, this is the handle, and I now need to start cleaning up this area where the bowl will be and cutting the profile. So I switched to one of the other tools in the kit, and this is just a spindle gouge, and I've sharpened it to a nice long fingernail type of grind, so I can now clean this area up. I'll be rounding off this area here, and I need to be a little bit more careful because this time I want to keep the wood as broad as possible. So let's get to work on that. You may notice that I'm watching what's happening up here rather than on this side of the piece of wood, because I'm watching the ghost of the form. So I can see that there's a little bit of a flat spot. So trim that down and then stop the lathe and have a look. Yep, a couple of little flat spots, one there, big one here, so I need to trim the shape down. And what's the perfect size? Perfect length, perfect diameter, whatever appeals to you. It's up to you. And if you're going to make a whole stack of these, you're going to start refining your shapes. And as time goes by, you might eventually get that perfect shape that works just nicely for everything. I'm still hoping to get there. So I need to now trim some more of this, need to trim out this flat spot, and so it's back to turning. Okay, so I've got the shape of the spoon almost to where I want it. The next stage of this will be the sanding, and I'm not going to bore you with that, so I'll come back to some more information once that's sanded. But so far I've only used the three tools. I've used the roughing gouge to do the bulk of the material removal, and for some of the shaping. I've also used the finger-pointed spindle gouge for the shaping of the bowl section, and the skew for cutting the end and for cutting a detail line here, and then as a planing cut on the handle itself. I'll use one more tool in a moment, but I'll just head off and do some sanding for the time being, and I'll be back with you as soon as that's done. Well, I've just spent about 5-10 minutes sanding this down. I've worked my way through 120 grit, 180 grit, 240 and 320. I don't go beyond 320. And to finish off, just hand sand with the grain. So I've made sure that I've kept my detail, I've kept my intersection lines here, nice clean end, which I'll then saw off and hand finish, and I'll cut this part off here by hand as well. One more thing that I like to do, and that is to add a couple of little detail lines high up on the handle. Now generally you could use a skew, but there are a couple of others that you could possibly use. For instance, here's the skew. That's the one that you most commonly use, using the long point to cut two little V lines. Or you can use this other tool, which is something that Crown have made, which is a 3-point tool, sharpened on 3 faces to give you a nice sharp point. And I would just simply push that into the piece of wood and it will cut a nice neat V. Alternatively, I could even use the Skewchigouge, which you've seen in one of the other videos, and I could use it similarly to the skew. So there are a variety of different tools you can use. So I'll just quickly use the fastest one, which is the 3-point tool, and I just need to start up the lathe and cut my 2 little grooves, and you'll see how quick and easy this is. Once I've cut the little V groove, sometimes it's an idea to just give it a really light touch with a bit of 320 grit sandpaper and switch the lathe off. Check to see that everything's nice and smooth, and that's it for the lathe. I'm now on to handwork. So this is where I need that rocking chair and the pipe. Since I last spoke to you, all that I've done is, on the bandsaw, or I could have done it by hand with a handsaw, I've nipped off the 2 ends, the scrap material that I no longer need, and I can clean up the ends quite easily. I'm going to be talking about carving tools and rasps in a moment, but you can just as easily use just one of these packing knives. And I just simply clean off the excess material. I'll then fix that up with a bit of sandpaper. Now that I've finished doing the bulk of the rough shaping on the outside with the rasp, I can now turn my attention to carving out the bowl part. And for that section, I'll be using these 3 knives, which are part of the Mora collection. Again, available from Timbecon. And the beauty of these knives is that they're sharpened on both edges, so you can use them left to right or right to left, and with varying degrees of curve you can get into almost any profile or any radius curve you need to work on. So I'd recommend you wear some safety gloves when you're doing this, and make sure these are super sharp, so be very, very careful and treat them with a lot of respect. And so all that I'm doing here is I'm just hollowing out and gradually deepening the bowl section. I can go the other direction as well, but make sure I keep my fingers behind the cutting edge. And as I said, safety gloves are a really good idea in at this part of the process. Once you've refined the shape of the spoon, it's up to you as to how you go about finishing it. Here I've just been using a carving knife and just carving the surface, just little scallops, and what that does is it leaves you with a nice, shiny, cleanly cut surface that just has that little bit of textural appeal to it. Alternatively, what you can do is you can use a scraper. This isn't a homemade scraper, but you can get the Crown range of scrapers, which are just cabinet scrapers, and using that you can clean the surface up so that it is nice and smooth and uniform, and then go through the usual process you follow when you're sanding. In terms of a finish to put on your wood, Timbecon does have a range of food safe finishes that you can use, and then you can enjoy the fruits of your labour and put your spoon to use.